I'm Simon, and this is 24 years of ITiCSE papers, a paper that I've written with Judy Sheard to help celebrate 25 years of ITiCSE conferences. It's a paper in bibliometrics, which is the study of measurable aspects of a body of papers and/or the authors of those papers. And in this one, it's the papers that we're studying. Is this computing education? Well, no, not really. But is it something of interest to a computing education conference? If it's applied to the papers of that conference, the answer seems to be yes, because the paper has been accepted. So we look at the ITiCSE papers and the working group reports. Over the 24 years of ITiCSE, there have been 1,295 papers and 129 working group reports. We look at them separately because the working group papers, working group reports are substantially longer than the papers, and we therefore expect them to differ from the conference papers in various ways. The main tool we use for our analysis is Simon's system, which was developed 13 years ago to explore computing education publications. You'll find all the detail in the paper itself, but for this presentation, we'll simply extract some of the figures and discuss them. We start with the context of the papers. Now, the context would be a course or a type of course, such as programming or database or data structures. But there are some papers that are not written in the context of any course. For example, a paper to look at how students interact socially while they're studying computing. And for papers of that sort, we have a context called broad-based. We found 33 different contexts while looking at these papers, and 5 of them really dominate. Before I actually detail them, I should point out the nature of this graph. It's what we call a cumulative proportions graph. So the figures over here on the left represent the actual numbers in 1996, the first year of the conference. But then in 1997, we have the average of the 1996 number and the 1997 number. And in 98, we have the average of those 3, and then we have the average of those 4. So it should be fairly clear that over time, as we move to the right, these lines are going to approach some sort of steady state as they are the average of more and more years. So what do we see over time? A distinct increase in papers set in programming courses. Somewhat of a decrease of papers not set in any particular course. A fairly steady state of engineering, around about 5% of, software engineering, about 5% of the papers. Data structures also fairly steady at about 5%, but a huge increase in the number of papers set in school computing contexts. The theme of a paper is what the paper's actually about. And again, we have many different themes. We found 23 in these papers, 6 of them dominate. Teaching and learning techniques and teaching and learning tools are both gradually dropping off. Papers on curriculum, fairly steady. Papers on assessment tools and assessment techniques, very, very slight growth. But the real growth has been in papers on ability, aptitude, and understanding of students. Next, we look at the nature of a paper, what kind of paper it is. And in Simon's system, there are 5 options. We'll start with position papers and proposals. These are papers that just tell the readers what the writers think or what the writers are proposing to do. Then we have reports, which tell the reader what the writers have done. Those two sort of stand aside from the other three. The other three can all be unequivocally considered research papers. We have analysis papers, which take existing data, analyze it, and draw conclusions. We have study papers, which produce their own data by instruments such as questionnaires or interviews or whatever, and then analyze the data. And we have experiments, which subject different groups of students to different treatment and see if they can determine any difference in the outcomes for those students. And we do see then that the research papers, all three of them, are growing in proportion, whereas the reports, the position papers, and the proposals are diminishing. And we can see that more clearly if we split them into just two groups. The research papers are the darker shade, and we can see how they have grown over the years of ITiCSE. It's not so easy to do proportions with the working groups because there are so few working group papers each year. But if we look at the actual numbers, it's still pretty clear that there is a growth in the number of these reports that are in the research category. Look, there's a lot more detail in the paper than we could possibly show here. But if this has got you at all interested in the bibliometrics of ITiCSE papers for the last 24 years, take a look at the paper.